Thank you, Kate, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. And this session will be divided into 3 parts. So in part 1, we're going to share a common understanding of global perspectives and look a little bit about what makes global perspectives different to other curriculum that we're currently teaching in the primary classroom. And this is going to give us an opportunity to look at the challenges that are posed by this curriculum. And we will then also look at the primary checkpoint assessment at the end of stage 6 and consider how the learning opportunities build towards this. Then we'll move on to the second part, where we'll try and illustrate some approaches that could be used to support your learners. And this will include a look at a skill strand specifically and how we can maybe build and develop that skill throughout upper primary and interweaving it with the other skill strands, just in order to develop the learner so they can approach that final all-important team project with confidence. In the final part of the session, we're going to discuss some maybe slightly more specific tools that could be helpful to develop reflective and independent learners. And throughout, we'll try to demonstrate how you can apply the Global Perspectives curriculum to your unique local context, and then carefully scaffold the learning opportunities with that ultimate aim of learner independence. Okay, so let's move on to part 1.
Great, thank you very much, Rebecca. So in this section, as Rebecca said, we're going to explore the particularities of this curriculum and what this means for you and your students. We're going to start by finding out a little about you and what you already know about global perspectives. So it's going to be really helpful to understand at what stage you are in your global perspectives journey. Are you coming today having taught the curriculum in your school? Are you new to it? Are you simply just a bit curious? There should be a poll appearing now in just a moment, and when it does, it'd be really helpful if you could complete it. It will allow us to gather the sort of experience you've got and possibly what your expectations are for today. There's going to be lots and lots of queries and there's a huge amount to cover, but we're assuming that as this is quite a new curriculum, the chances are you're going to be quite new to it, and we've pitched it with that in mind. So let's just take a moment. If you could just fill this in, that would be great. And see where we are and where you are in your journey. Oh, right, okay, great. Oh, lots of you don't know much about it at all, but we've still got quite a lot of you that are currently teaching it or looking at teaching it quite soon. So that's really good. Okay, well, thanks very much for that. That's really helpful, sorry, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions as we go through this afternoon, sorry. Okay, so now let's have a closer look at global perspectives and try and understand what's involved. It's a really exciting programme. It's got the potential to incorporate the wider school curricula. It gives learners the opportunity to learn in different ways and develop an awareness of the world around them so that they can begin to understand their place in it. Cambridge describes Global Perspectives as a unique transformational programme that helps students at every stage of school education develop outstanding transferable skills, including critical thinking, research and collaboration. It also places an emphasis on developing students' ability to think about a range of global issues where there is always more than one point of view. If we unpick this, it'll be helpful for us to identify some key aspects of the curriculum that we need to be mindful of when we're planning and executing global perspectives in the classroom. Firstly, there's a focus on skills over content. I imagine you're already familiar with these, but just in case you're not, these are evaluation, analysis, research, collaboration, communication, and reflection. They all carry equal importance, although they're often interwoven and used at different points during the stages of preparing, conducting and thinking about projects. The contents or topics that are used to hook the students in are just simply that. They're just a vehicle to get your learners engaged so that they can practice their skills in different situations and with different resources. But one must always be conscious that it's a skill that you're trying to develop and not the knowledge. They must be able to use and apply these skills in different settings, which is what makes them transferable. To do this, there is a strong emphasis on developing reflective learners who are increasingly asked to question their own skill acquisition and what they've learnt about themselves, their team, and the issue. The course is designed to encourage learners to build an awareness of the world around them and different points of view. As teachers, we know that a child's interaction and understanding of their environment develops with age. The implications, therefore, in global perspectives is that this can affect how learners are expected to consider what their local context is and the different points of view as they move through primary. All learners are going to be thinking about global issues and trying to make connections. However, how these are developed locally might be slightly different depending on their age. Starting point for young learners might be more focused on friends and family in their school or home setting, whilst older children might start to begin to look at the local community to make their connections with the wider global perspective. And the collaborative and problem-solving dimension of the curriculum requires that the learning environment can adapt to the direction of the learner's interests, the direction that the learner's interests take them. Learners will need to develop skills that encourage self-directed investigation into local issues that are both of interest to them and also respond to a local problem or issue. It's important to note here that this might mean that you need to adapt your learning environment. And finally, the programme places great importance on collaboration. Learners are expected to consider the roles they take, their contribution, and think about the good teamwork and what it looks like. They complete their tasks often as a team. They identify core team skills, and then they need to reflect on how they worked within that team. Now, based on what you've just heard, and perhaps also your own experience, it'd be now interesting to look at what you think are the greatest challenges of global perspectives as a curriculum. If you've not taught it before, you might want to just base that on some of the things that I've just mentioned. But it's quite important to try and think about what those challenges might be. What do you think they are? It would be really, really helpful if you could, at this point now, add some ideas, share some of your thoughts in the chat. What do you think are the greatest challenges to you in your classroom if you've already been teaching it? What problems are you coming across? What areas do you find the most difficult in your classroom setting? Hopefully this workshop, this session today, is going to manage to kind of find some solutions to some of those things. Can't promise to find answers to everything, but hopefully we'll have a little bit. So I'm not quite sure what's coming up yet, but I can see, yeah.
So someone has said cultural differences and tolerance, implementing the concept of global perspectives in the classroom without books. And someone has said that large classes can be an obstacle.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to do quite a lot on resources actually in the next section and even the final section, just trying to get you thinking a bit creatively about what those might look like. It's true that large groups are also tricky, but again, remember this is often a team approach, so it's a question perhaps of dividing up your groups, but again, we can come to those as well. Yes, resources, again, we need to think creatively about what those might look like and getting students involved and interested. And one really needs to think about engaging them and getting on things that they're going to be interested by. That's going to hook them if these are questions, and the learning environment allows them to follow those interests. Yeah, really interesting. Thank you very much. There certainly does seem to be quite a lot of things that we need to be mindful of, and quite a lot of challenges with this curriculum. And with this in mind, we're now going to take a little look at the end of stage 6 project, the team project. And even if you're not teaching stage 6, it's quite useful to know what the end game is. This is going to help you find a consistent approach to teaching this within your school and making sure that you've got a good skills progression. It's also really helpful to note down some of the areas that have been highlighted for further development. So these are areas that perhaps schools are finding the most difficult. One of those is trying to make sure that you're developing projects which are around your local context. And again, this is partly why we chose this as a title for today. And considering also the different types of points of view that you might have on this and thinking about the full breadth of what those might be. And finally, also making sure that you're writing, or the children are writing, very thoughtful personal reflections. This all takes lots of practice. Now, let's remind ourselves or familiarise ourselves, if you've not come across it before, of what the team project entails. And it'll help us to understand what's involved. So you can see here that the team project is very much a process, and it's done over an extended period of time. Different schools allow different amounts of time for it, but there's quite a lot of stages to it. And along the way, children are expected to evidence what they've done. And as teachers, you will also be assessing part of it through observation. At the end of it, there is also a team report and a personal reflection. And you'll note that the personal reflection is 40% of the final mark. Just shows the importance that's given to reflection in this programme. So learners are expected to work in teams, and to begin with, they need to identify a local issue. Then they need to research it and understand all the different points of view and perspectives that could be had on this particular issue. And then from that, decide on an action that could improve, change, or resolve an issue. The action they choose needs to be achievable in the time. This can be quite tricky for 10, 11-year-olds. And the evidence needs to be something that shows what's happened or any impact that it's had. For example, they might want to show comments that they've received as a result of their project, or maybe some changes in behaviour, things that they've noticed, or changes in the way that space is used somewhere, or how people are interacting with different places within the school. The written element needs to provide details, thoughtful reflections, and explain different aspects of the project, including engagement and teamwork. As the project's over such an extended period of time, evidence gathering and noting down of reflections is a key element during the project. And these are skills that need to be acquired and developed in earlier stages. Hence why it's quite interesting, even if you're not teaching stage 6, to know what's at the end of it, so that you know what you're building towards. The project applies the skills they've developed over the programme, although you'll notice that the individual skills are not assessed individually or referred to even explicitly. This is because these skills rarely work in isolation, and the project reflects that. The final written elements, the team report and personal reflection, expect that the learner can explain their reasons for choosing the local issue, giving its local importance, and then provide different points of view on the chosen issue and use research to support them. State goals really clearly and make the connections between the goals and the issues. Describe their actions in detail, and we'll look at how they might want to evidence that later on, and present a balanced discussion identifying challenges and successes. And in their personal reflections, which is done by themselves as individuals, they need to write thoughtful reflections on their own engagement in the project, how maybe their personal perspectives have changed as a result of doing the project, and give their own the contributions that they have made and the impact to the project, including the benefits and the challenges of teamwork. So hopefully, as we've gone through all of these aspects, you're beginning to build a picture of what a successful global perspective student would look like. It should now be possible to think about a learner profile. What words would you use to describe a successful global perspective student? For example, do they need to be resilient, thoughtful, curious? It'd be really nice at this point if you could just put some words perhaps in the chat, or even just think about it, what words you think would be indicative of a good global perspective student. Open-minded, yeah. Creative, reflective, yes, reflective's coming up a lot, yeah. Determined, Yeah, some really good words coming up. We need to add those to the word. So I'm going to share with you now a word cloud that we produced from similar comments made by teachers. If you can see your word there, that's great. I don't know if you know how word clouds work, but basically the larger the word, the greater the importance is given to that word, because more people have considered it to be an important one. And in our word cloud there, you can see collaborative and team player, reflective definitely have come up there. So hopefully you've thought of some of those words yourself. Creative is there, although perhaps not as big as some of you believe it needs to be. So hopefully you will see some of your words there, and hopefully you found this activity quite helpful, because it allows you to really think about what you're trying to nurture in your classrooms and how you're trying to support and bring out those characteristics in your students. And this leads us on to what you as a teacher need to be mindful of. You need to be really focused on the skill and how it can be practiced regularly. Consider how you can do this in a variety of ways. Help students to take notice of issues around them. This is really important. This is how you're going to make it local. In school, outside the window, in the community, all around you, always try and think about how global issues are mirrored in your local context and what the local impact is to you as a student or as a school. Encourage opportunities to see the viewpoints of others, whether those are the views of their peers, friends, adults around them, or maybe just important people that they know, like environmentalists or doctors. And then think about what your learners need to do in the way of resources. Now, again, I know lots of you have mentioned this as an issue, and hopefully we'll give you some select suggestions in just a moment, but they need to be age appropriate, they need to be the right level of language, they need to be manageable, and it may mean that you need to adapt some, or just think creatively of where you get those resources from and who they are. Make sure that you're building in time for reflection, as we've said, and lots of you notice that's a really important element, and making sure your class environment is inquiry focused and that they're being encouraged to ask questions all the time. Now, over the remainder of the session, we're going to look at some ways that you can achieve this. So I'll pass you over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Kath. Oh, get my screen to work. So in this section, we're going to explore a little how you might develop one of these skills and what it might look like as we work through the different stages in our upper primary global perspectives course. And as Katharine has said, global perspectives is a skills-based and not a content or a knowledge-based course, and that is so important. So with this in mind, it's really key that in each unit of work or task or challenge that you work through with your learners, that both you and they are really aware which skill or skills they're developing and drawing upon. And as Katharine also mentioned, although they'll be focusing on one main skill as you develop those skills, it's also key that they don't think of these skills in total isolation, because when it does come down to that final end project in stage 6, they will need to demonstrate all of those skills all together, working together in order to succeed. So, for example, when you're practicing learning your research skills, they might also be working in teams and collaborating. They'll probably be communicating information, looking at ways to communicate. They might be analysing the research or the evidence, and they might be evaluating it to see how useful it is for their purpose, for what they want to achieve. And of course, they should be reflecting throughout. Now, this sounds like quite a heavy task load for both teachers and learners, but it's important to remember that learners are on a learning journey throughout primary global perspectives. So we can take a big breath. It's a very cyclical course, and by that I mean we're looking to build on and grow learners' skills as they move up through the stages. And they're going to gain a deeper awareness and an understanding of each of those skills independently, and how they can interlink or interweave them as they progress and hopefully work more autonomously. So let's focus now on one skill strand, just to try and demonstrate just a little what we might mean by this and how to track how we might develop this particular skill set across primary or as we move up through primary. So quite a big skill set, research. How can we use different strategies to scaffold research for primary learners? And what's most appropriate in terms of that scaffolding in our different stages? Well, first of all, with each of the skills, we need to be mindful that if we want the class to take action on an issue that has a local impact or relevance, then we first of all want to think what that issue might be. So we're almost working backwards, starting with our issue. By the time learners get up to stage 6 and that final project, our goal is for them to choose the issue themselves if possible. However, at the earlier stages, I think this is something that we do need to provide for them. So if we're focusing on research, for example, then we need to ask ourselves, we need to think what local issue would provide the opportunity or multiple opportunities for learners to engage in research, preferably different forms or methods of research, in order to develop and broaden their awareness of this skill. And then we also need to consider if the research we have in mind is actually practical, i.e., will they be able to do it? Will they be able to access it, both physically and in terms of content and maturity? And we need to be mindful that over the course of a learner's primary global perspective study, they're going to need multiple opportunities to engage in research with different local issues. So it is fundamental that your global perspectives team find time to plan together, and where it's viable, maybe also to liaise with other teachers, where there's a crossover of content, ideas or skills. And an example of that might be liaising with a science teacher if you want to look at effects or attitudes towards extreme weather conditions, or perhaps a maths teacher if you want to look at how learners can record information and interpret information in graphs and charts, for example. So let's move on and look at a specific example. So we're starting in stage 3. And I've chosen my wider global issue, which is obeying the law. And I've thought, well, laws affect us on a global and national and on a much more local level. So I'm seeing there's a wide picture of what law is and how it affects me and my environment personally. So in stage 3, I want to customize the focus so that it's going to be age appropriate. And I want to allow for lots of lovely research moments in this unit of work. Because in stage 3, my learners might be very new to this idea of what research is. They might have even not really ever heard the term before, let alone used it. And my goal, I've started with my goal for the end of the learning, as you can see here, is for learners to be able to write a short questionnaire, which is going to help them find out what people think about their school's rules and if they can be improved. So it's going to be very local to them, and it's going to involve the research of a questionnaire. And I want them to be able to record their findings. So in the first part of the learning journey, I need to find age-appropriate and meaningful context in which to open the discussion of this issue, obeying the law. Now, obviously, international law or even national law, it probably won't be something my learners in stage 3 are interested in or even aware of. So I need to find a hook that will help them to access and understand what the issue is, something that's relatable to them, meaningful to them. So you can see here on the screen, we've got some examples of input I might provide in order to explore this issue of obeying the law in a relatable way. I want my learners to have a personal connection to the issue. So I'm going to begin by asking them to think about the law in sort of terms of rules, and where they see or need rules, where they find them, why those rules exist in those scenarios, how they affect them, and what happens when we don't have or don't follow rules. And I might choose to talk to them about rules at school, in the classroom, who sets them, why do we set them, what happens when we don't follow them, in various sports they play or games they play, maybe how they travel on transport, rules they find, or at home, or even rules in friendship groups. What are those rules, and how do they come about? How do they affect us? So asking and getting them to ask questions concerning the rules around them is going to encourage those higher order skills that we're hoping to develop throughout the course. And in order to scaffold the learning and allow all learners to access this issue, it's important to find multiple input sources in this early stage of learning, as the more ways in which you can open the door to the topic for them, the more ways they can discuss the issues around it, they can think about what it means to them and to other people they know, the more likely they are to start firing and making connections in their minds, to ask more questions, be more curious, deepen their awareness and their understanding of the issue in both that personal and that local context, and possibly on a wider scale too. So we have written and visual input sources here, you can see. And I think it's important that especially, well, all the way through primary, but especially in stage 3, that they are really encouraged to interact with the sources by doing more than just reading them. So, for example, I've got games rules here, and I'm going to ask my learners to play some of those games. I'm going to ask them to look at what happens if we've got rules missing, what happens if I tell someone you don't have to play by the rules. Why do these rules exist? And could we improve these rules? Do we like these rules? So I'm going to really ask them to experience this idea of rules in their research. They might also consider the rules in the classroom. They could visit another classroom, for example, and observe what happens there. Maybe think about rules that exist in that classroom or rules that they think would help that classroom. And they could discuss what rules they might add to their own environment in the classroom there. And so as a teacher, I need to be aware of all the activities they do. Where can I find the opportunities for collaboration and communication? And how can I help them to notice how they collaborate and communicate? And then I'm opening the gates to, or the door to, a discussion of how we can improve those skills, how we can work on them. What do we like when we're doing this? So they're probably going to be working either in pairs or in teams for virtually everything I do in my global perspectives body of work. And they'll need to think about how this helped them or maybe hindered them, what problems occurred because of the partnership or the team, and then to try and analyze or try to think of ways they could have avoided those problems and they could have dealt with them, and next time what they could do better to improve it. When we're talking about research, we're also talking about learning to record information. And obviously, again, we need to make sure we're encouraging, teaching them to do this in age-appropriate ways. So here are some of the stage 3 formats that kind of link with their maths curriculum. And the findings that they're recording, it might be data, it might be opinions or perspectives or personal ideas. So it's really important that learners understand which method of recording information works best for the kind of information that they're trying to note down. So again, this is a really clear example of where I'm going to need to liaise with my maths teacher, just to make sure I'm on the right track, that I'm not introducing something that is above level for them. So scaffolding begins with exposure to many facets or areas of our wider issue through preliminary research. And that's in order just to activate, to build on prior knowledge and to establish that personal connection with the issue, to really hook them in, I think, as Kath used that term earlier, to hook them in. And the input at this lower stage is going to be provided by the teacher. Where possible, it's going to be really personal, close to home and the learner's immediate surroundings. The research methods that they're going to try out need to be interactive, collaborative, communicative, and we really need to start at stage 3 to have those moments of reflection where learners can assess their progress. But we will talk a little bit more about that later on. So, if we come back to that initial end of learning task I've designed for my class, we'll see that we've opened the door into that issue with our choice of sources, our research activities. We've raised awareness and understanding of the different ways we can record findings and show those findings. Now it's time to focus more specifically on the idea of the local issue or context. So in this case, the one I've identified is rules around the school. And the research method that I want my learners to actually use is the idea of a questionnaire. But first of all, I'm still going to get them to do a little bit of preliminary research, and I'm going to ask them to walk around the school and take photos or draw pictures of any rules they find in different areas. So I'm going to use observation as a research method, and I'm going to still look at how we can record our findings visually. And then, of course, we're going to discuss those. And through that discussion, we're going to find what we want to ask in our questionnaire. So the task here, as you can see for stage 3, is quite specific. But we can allow or encourage some learner autonomy in this. For example, they could choose a specific area or areas of the school to investigate, and that might follow their preliminary observation research. And then when they're working in their teams, you know, we can give them the autonomy to decide the questions they want to write in their questionnaire. They can make decisions about who they're going to ask, how many people they're going to ask, and maybe when and where they're going to ask them, so they can begin to take ownership. And then they're going to, of course, conduct the questionnaire and record their findings to share with the class. So, a little recap. So in stage 3, our research pathway looks a little bit like this. We're supporting the learning by determining the issue and working out how it relates, how we think it will relate to our local context. Of course, class discussion should be encouraged. So the focus might change slightly depending on your students, but at stage 3, I think predominantly that is coming from you as the teacher. And we're going to provide an end task or an end action that's going to provide an opportunity for our learners to showcase their skills development at the end of this body of work. And again, quite specific, again, very, very supported. We're going to provide multiple and meaningful opportunities for learners to engage in the issue, to conduct research on a very local, a very personal scale. And so this means for us, it's identifying those resources or sources and then guiding learners how to use them effectively. And we'll take baby steps in learning how to find out what people think about an issue by introducing questions and questionnaires. We'll introduce and support learners in recording the results of their findings too, and start to discuss the best methods to do this. And also, very importantly, to discuss why recording information is important. We'll also do a lot of talking about the research process. So we'll make the learning really explicit, and I think that's very important. And then, of course, we'll provide lots of opportunities for pair and group work so that we're encouraging and discussing collaboration and communication all the time. And very importantly, we'll begin encouraging learners to reflect. We'll provide lots of opportunities for written, verbal discussion and feedback on the tasks and how learners approach them. Okay, so let's see how this model might work or might have developed when we're now jumping to work with a stage 5 class. Okay, so here we want to provide an opportunity to practice research skills again, but in a different context. So the wider issue that we've got here is water, food and farming. And here's our end task. It's our local issue. It's still based in the school, based in children's immediate surroundings. And it's to prepare an awareness campaign about food waste. Okay, so immediately we can see that at this level, we're actually asking learners to plan an action that could improve, change, or resolve the issue. And I'd like to highlight the word investigate in the task, which shows how we're removing some of the scaffolding and we're asking learners to work much more independently here at stage 5 than they may have done at stage 3. So rather than being told to use a questionnaire as they were in stage 3, here we're asking them to think, what possible ways could I do research and which of those might be the most useful to me to sort out my action, to plan my action. They'll need to assess the extent of food waste. They'll need to think about and find out about people's attitudes towards it before they can suggest an action that fits the purpose within their local context. And we're asking them, therefore, to analyse their research in order to identify the biggest problem or problems in relation to the topic, and then to communicate this in order to raise awareness in a useful way. So they'll need to select the important or the relevant results of their multiple methods of research, and they're doing that in order to support and justify the action that they've chosen to do. And in the final sentence here, you can see that we're very much telling them very explicitly there is a big focus on reflection. And that reflection here is about how you worked in a team. So that's really, really important that we're reminding them you need to reflect, but you also need to reflect on not just the process, not just the research, but how you worked in that team, what you added, the value you added. So we've still got that same initial research stage in place where we're going to introduce the issue and we're going to hook our learners in. And we'll still be supplying some of those input sources. But of course, now we're in stage 5, we can expose learners to longer, more authentic texts. Obviously, they still will need to come from child-friendly websites, books, videos, news reports, documentaries, for example. We can also introduce more text-heavy infographics, more complex as we're moving up through our levels. And we can give them more background information more quickly. And what we want to do is expand their idea of research so that they are definitely linking it to those skills of analysis and evaluation by beginning to question their sources, to identify who wrote them, why they wrote them, and how reliable and useful this actually makes that particular source. So we're broadening the research element and we're closely linking it to the other skills that learners need to be successful in global perspectives. So where possible, look for opportunities for learners to conduct more independent research and to find the way they want to do that research, and then discuss how they're going to do that research constructively and effectively. We're going to look at the issue of food waste here on a global level as well. In stage 5, it's important that learners begin to consider different or multiple global perspectives and why there may be more than one perspective. before they narrow down and focus on their local context. So what's going on in the world is really the question we're asking them. And this will build from work that they've begun in stage 3, where they've, for example, maybe begun to think, are we all the same or different in our class, among our peer group? You know, why are there similarities and differences? Do we always agree? Why or why not? So here we're just expanding that to look on a much more global level. So by this stage, our learners should have been exposed to lots of different research sources and methods, and should be beginning to understand how and why we research. So therefore, now, for me, what needs to be introduced and supported in terms of research is the awareness and the ability of how to construct a useful research question. And the reason they need to be able to do this is in order to identify, define, and then investigate an issue or problem. And the reason they need to be able to do that is so that they can plan a relevant action or solution. So it's a little chain of events. So learners need to learn to construct research questions, and they need to learn that those should have achievable goals. And of course, in primary, learners are only just beginning this skill. So remember that they're going to continue to develop this all the way throughout secondary, but they should be beginning to think about it. They should also be thinking about how to plan their research to be the most efficient and the most effective. And again, that's something they're going to need a lot of support with. Bearing in mind, they should be working collaboratively in teams, and they should be beginning to identify and vocalize what they perceive to be their own strengths and weaknesses within those team group scenarios. And they should be starting to use this awareness to promote strong and effective teamwork strategies. So identifying how to split up tasks within a team work, team project, and who would be best to do each of those. And the only way they're going to learn this is if they've had lots of opportunities in the earlier stages to think about what is a team, why do we have teams, and then to also experience working in a team in multiple ways on multiple different projects or tasks. And also to have some of those tasks and projects divided into key roles within the task. So for example, if I'm asking them to show or raise awareness with a poster of an issue, then I might say, well, for a poster, you might have some drawers, some artists, you might have some writers, you might have some researchers who are going to find the information, you might have an editor, you might have a materials gatherer, for example, and they're going to start to think about what their skill set is and how they can help to provide a good working environment within that group. And also what works well and what doesn't work well in a team. So, as I've mentioned, our stage 5 learners, they should be more confident planning their research, but they're still going to continue to need support with organisation and recording of evidence and findings, and then being able to use that to identify their achievable outcomes. So they'll still need to be exposed to various methods they can use to record their findings and then helped to interpret them. And here are some more stage 5 age appropriate examples. You can also see we've got a KWL chart on there, and this really is there as an example of how we're encouraging autonomy specifically at stage 5. So for example, we might work really consistently with a KWL chart here, encouraging our learners to focus at the beginning of what they know about the topic, about the issue as they begin the research process, and then what they would like to know as they move through the process, and then what they've learned by the end of the process. So as you can see, the stage 5 research pathway does look a lot like the stage 3 pathway, but actually learners in stage 5, will be expected to become more independent in practicing each skill. So whilst the approach to research is similar to stage 3, the scaffolding is being gently removed. So prompt questions and guidance are still going to be necessary, but learners should be encouraged to start identifying the issues they want to explore. They should have a better understanding of the processes required to reach that end goal. They should also be able to start to identify who might have a point of view on a particular issue and what methods they might use to find out more. And they should be able to construct questions for simple surveys, interviews and questionnaires now. They will also be expected to write more independently about what they find out and make suggestions based on their research. They should be developing more refined and in-depth reflection skills as they head towards stage 6, where this is the vital component of that end project. Oops, sorry, I moved too fast. So let's move on to our final part of the webinar, and we'll just look a little bit at what you as a teacher might need to pop in your toolkit when you are teaching global perspectives. So Katharine and I have identified 5 main tools that we think, are really key to putting into your toolkit. We're going to look at each one in turn and show you just a few examples of how to illustrate how you can do this. So here they are. We've got the identifying of the resources, questioning and discussion techniques, moments of reflection journals, and top tips and checklists that we might want to use. As we move through these, I'm sure you're going to have loads of ideas, loads of things you already do, you already use, because obviously there are endless possibilities. And if you feel that you'd like to share some of those in the chat for other participants, then please, I'm sure everyone would be very grateful. So, first of all, we've talked about this quite a bit, that in order to get learners making connections between the broader global issues and their own community, it's important that you collect resources. And it is tricky to find things that are age appropriate, especially at those lower stages. Pictures, remember, are very good at illustrating local issues, as is observation of a place, a person, a time, and people in the community are a great resource for research. Obviously be mindful that lots of authentic sources are out there, but obviously they're going to need adaptation in terms of language and content. And it is important to look beyond the idea of research being text-based or internet-based. Those are really important and key resources, but there is a lot more that you can use, and especially for your local context. And as teachers, you know that it's really important that you can build a bank of resources or of resource possibilities that you can use for future lessons, for future years. So building that bank.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so the other thing is techniques to discuss and question. You need to make discussion and questioning part of what you do. There are many ways that you can approach this in the classroom, and you probably, as Becky says, have lots of ideas already of how you do that and how you can do that. And they're likely to be influenced by your school setting, your own teaching style and your learners. And I know from the comments, lots of you are worried about time, but it's really important to make time for this and make an environment which is really inquiry based, and make sure you're really encouraging that. And fundamentally, learners need a safe and supportive space to explore their ideas and interest. You need to show that you value their discussions and their questions, and that they've got a purpose and they've got lots of time to practice. So give them loads of time to lead their own meetings, their own discussions, take notes, practice turn taking and effective skills for decision making. You can get them to record their conversations in writing, on paper, or even with voice recordings. And again, lots of you are worried about how you can assess them. If they've recorded things, that also gives you another opportunity to see what they're doing, and you can come in and see where they've got up to and what they've recorded. This can help them also gather evidence. They can use it later, and that's really important to get that skill going for stage 6, but also earlier on. Give them opportunities to present their ideas to each other, invite them to do constructive feedback. You can practice that. What does constructive feedback look like? How can you ask questions? How can you make that positive? 2 stars and a wish, that type of thing. Encourage learners to develop questions that they're really hungry to answer. I know some of you are worried about engagement. If they choose the topics, if they follow their interests, they're likely to be more interested in finding out the answers to those questions, and let them know that their questions are valued. Use role playing as much as you possibly can. Hot seating techniques are great for that, to develop and understand different points of view. Get them writing questions for the different audiences and functions. Who has an opinion on food waste in the school? What would you want to ask them? For example, do you think that the people who make the food and provide the food at school are going to think differently about food waste to parents, or maybe environmentalists? Explore who might have an opinion, get them to answer those questions in different hot seating situations, or even go and ask people. Play practical games, as much practical stuff as you possibly can. Really make sure that's part of what you do. Encourage active listening, because that can improve contributions and discussions.
Okay, and building time into the timetable for reflection is essential. And again, when we're worried about time, we're worried about fitting everything in, and this is, you know, we can get carried away by the activities and by discussing the issues that can be really interesting. Reflection can be the bit that doesn't happen, and yet reflection is what will help learners consolidate and become the most successful they can be in this global perspectives curriculum. And we saw that when Kath was talking about the weighting of the reflection in the stage 6 end product. So the more practice they have, the more thoughtful and detailed their responses will be in that team project at the end of primary. So building reflection opportunities regularly into your lessons will help learners become thoughtful, problem solvers, active members of teams. So in the lower stages, what you want to do is build awareness and help them to just be able to start making those small steps in reflection. So it's important to make time for plenaries, which come at the end of the busy lesson, but they're really important moments. And you might want to even start those with a think, pair, share idea, so that learners have time to just focus on what they actually think, and then to confirm, reject, adapt, and before they share. And hear other people's points of views, which are also really important. And reflection is going to take many different forms, because it might be, how well do you think you dealt with the tasks today? Did you manage the research? Did you record your findings appropriately and effectively? How easy was that for you? It might be something to do with the issue. What did you learn today? Has it made you change your opinion of anything you thought you knew? And it might be, you know, did you enjoy the lesson? Was this easy for you? Was this difficult? What was it like working in a team today? Was it a good team day? Was it not such a good team day today for you? And why? So there are lots of angles to come at for reflection. And all the time asking those questions, again, that questioning environment. Obviously, exit tickets are a very nice way as well of allowing students a moment to just think about what they think, just to reflect. So we can see you've got the traffic lights there. You can ask them a question before they go, and they can come and stick their name on red, amber or green, depending on their answer, how well they feel they did today. Whether they liked the outcome of the lesson, whether they understood the lesson, etc., etc. So little small steps that require reflection on both the issue and the skill that they've been using and developing in the lesson.
Great. And just to add to that, it's also about recording those reflections that they've got evidence for later. If they're recording reflections, it might help them to see progress over a period of time, as well as they'll need to do in stage 6. I know somebody's mentioned the idea of or questioned how we can help them define their action. As we mentioned earlier, and as Rebecca mentioned, there is a stage to that, which is you've got to identify your issue and then find your research, do your research, find different points of view. But there you can see as well, there are different ways they can take ideas for actions from elsewhere. They can then talk through and record their ideas about whether that meets the goal, whether it's achievable, whether they should shortlist it or not. Those are different ways that you can help them to filter some of those ideas through. Again, you find the KWL as well, just to show what their progress. They might need some starter questions. They might need some gap fills for younger years. They need to think about themselves as a team and also reflect individually on their own points of view and how those have changed. The more you can put those to show the progress, the better that can be. And then if we just go to the next slide.
Yeah.
You'll see their photographs are a really, really good way of evidencing some of the things that they've done. It's worth drawing your attention to the fact that the picture, for example, of the rubbish collection, there's people involved. It shows the action. It doesn't just show a pile of rubbish. It shows what's being done. Sometimes before and after photographs can be really good, getting them practicing, showing where the change has happened. Also taking photographs of them actively doing whatever it is that they're doing, whether that's doing a performance or an assembly, or working on PowerPoints, presenting to others. It might be an audio or a video recording. It depends on what you've got available to you, but they can be just as simple as photographs. It's a really good way of showing evidence. It reminds the learners and helps them when they start to write their projects later on.
Okay. And then our final point in the toolkit is top tips and checklists. And these can be really helpful to support your learners to identify how they've improved. As Kath was saying, that's really important that they're seeing the progress within a skill. So top tips, just a list of top tips will give them success criteria. And these top tips could be something that you're providing in those lower stages. It could be something that's a bit more negotiated, brainstormed in your higher levels. And your checklists, they can be used to see how well the outcome matched the task. So you can scaffold these again with specific prompt questions and then remove those a little as our learners become more confident. Now, don't think this needs to be done in depth in every lesson. You can use simple tick lists as well, which track progress, but building the language of reflection will be more successful, making it an intrinsic part of what learners perceive global perspectives to be and how they're constantly questioning themselves and reflecting on the processes will be more successful if you can allocate time within a body of work. So at little crunch points, just to find the place for your top tips, the place for your checklists.
Yeah, and on the back of that, I know time is always a problem in the primary classroom, but we can't emphasize enough the time. Reflection is actually time well spent. I know sometimes we rush it at the end, but it is really important. So now let's just look at our learning environment. This is our last slide for the session. We're just going to take a little moment to think about that. So remember, talk to the other teachers and explore opportunities to build these skills. If time's difficult, then the more you can try and do this in a cross-curricular way, you can build these skills in other subjects as well. Take opportunities. Remember, these are transferable skills and they need to be encouraged and practiced across the curriculum. And remember, your class and your school is unique, it's different. You're going to have different skills, different needs, different interests, different resources, and these differences need to be celebrated. And as we saw also, your projects need to be in your local context and they need to be just special to you. And finally, think about building strong foundations for your learners and gently removing the scaffolding so that their learning stands strong. If you remove too much too quickly, your learners are going to become despondent. But if you keep that protective structure too strong, the learners won't be able to fly solo at the end of stage 6. You need to be equipping them as best you can and giving them increasing autonomy and responsibility for their own decisions with this curriculum. And that ends our bit now. It's your time now for questions. So over back to Kate.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Katharine and Rebecca. That was really informative and really interesting. So yeah, we've got a little bit of time left for questions. We are running over time a little bit, so if you'd like to stay on, that's great, but we understand if you have to leave. So you should see a QR code on the slide at the moment. If you'd like to request samples for the Cambridge Primary Global Perspectives resources or any of our other publishing, please scan the screen and fill in your details, or you can follow the link that we've just posted in the chat. So on to the questions. We've had a few come through. First of all, we had a few people in the chat mentioning that they were worried about children being afraid to express their opinions for fear of judgment from their peers. Do you have any tips of how to deal with that?
I don't mind starting with that, and then Becca, you can jump in if you want. I think it's really important before you embark on this curriculum to really have that conversation with the children and set those rules up, which is why it's quite an interesting one if you were to do the topic, for example, that Becky outlined with the obeying the rules. It's quite a good way to start that. They may well in other subjects be talking about like that. In PSHE, for example, there might well be an opportunity to discuss that, but it's got to be a safe space, and it's got to be a place where they can really practice that, and that's something you need to get as a culture and have a chat with the children about before they start having these conversations. I don't know, Becky, if you've got something you want to add to that.
I totally agree, and I think it is also about trying to find the strengths in each child, the value in each of your learners, so that when they are working together, when they are we're demonstrating, oh, I can't say that word at this time. We're demonstrating exactly why we're valuing each person, because looking for their skill sets, looking for their uniqueness will hopefully help others to value their opinions too. And as Kath said, it's really important that you do just a lot of collaborative work, a lot of sharing ideas, getting them to try and brainstorm in groups. If some children are reluctant, you can use things like speaking tokens so that each child gets a chance to speak. Techniques like this will help and encourage and show that you value everyone's opinion in the room. That's really important. That whatever they say, you respond positively, even if you then need to move on, correct, sort of change the direction a little bit, but always giving that positivity, always showing the value.
Thank you, that's great advice. So we've had someone else has asked about teamwork and implementing teamwork when they say they only have one student in their grade 9. How can they implement the teamwork and component 3?
I would say that would be really tricky. I can see you've got one student. I can only suggest that the team is formed even if they're not part of the group and they're not being assessed, because teamwork and collaboration is an essential part of this curriculum. I don't really know what else to say about that.
No, I suppose the only thing that springs to my mind, and I don't know obviously in your setting, is whether you have lunchtime clubs, after school clubs, things like this, that you could actually, as Katharine's kind of saying, invite others into this this club that is GP, so that your one student in those moments gets to collaborate and communicate and work on those processes. And then I suppose in your lesson time, you will be able to focus very much more on, the individual skills. But yeah, that's a tough one. That is a tough one.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to the next one. So someone has said, how much leeway do you suggest we give our students during the research stage? Would interclassroom cooperation be truly beneficial for our class? Or should we limit scope in order to avoid possible disruptions of the process?
Well, I don't know what age we're talking about with students. I think the whole point of this curriculum again is to give them as much independence as possible. If you're worried about their age and not being able to access whatever it is that you've asked them to do, obviously the small group sizes, maybe they need a little bit of guidance as to where they go. So depending on if they're younger, they're going to need more scaffolding for that than if they're older. But the aim would be for them to be able to do lots of that by themselves, and to build those skills. Becky, I don't know if you want to add.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, again, I totally agree with you, Katharine. It's difficult until we know sort of what age and stage we're talking about. And obviously everything, gets more independent and sort of less teacher-led, teacher-guided. But I mean, in principle, the idea of like working across classes sounds amazing. It sounds very global perspectives.
Thank you. I think we've probably got time for one more, and then that's about time up. So let me see. Someone has asked, I understand that the main skill to practice in the classroom is research. How do you solve the problem of sharing devices and literature in a classroom and keeping time management? So I think that's more of a time management question.
Well, I would say the sharing of devices and literature, again, I think you need to come back to what we were saying about the types of research. Research isn't just about using the internet or books. It's about much more than that. It's about observing around the school. It's about observing outside your window, taking photographs, looking at literature that's local, doing questionnaires. There's so much more to it. So in terms of sharing devices, I think perhaps one needs to tailor it so that there's a range of different research opportunities, so that's a bit easier to do.
And I would, if I just jump in, Kath, I would say that the way I would set that up as a primary classroom is I would have 4 or 5, depending on the numbers in your class, stations around my classroom, each of them working on a completely different aspect of research, or whatever you're doing and whatever stage of research they're at. And therefore, if you do need devices that you feel groups will need, they're going to circulate, moving from station to station after their allotted time. And so your devices, if you feel they're necessary for what they're doing, will be on one station.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've done quite a lot as well on jigsaw reading, so that if you do a task, they might read different sections of that and then share that information. Again, that gives an opportunity to share questions as well, and to make sure that they're actively listening to information. So there's lots of different ways you can do this.
All right, I think that's all we've got time for today, unfortunately. But just again, thank you so much for being on this webinar, everyone, and thank you to Rebecca and to Katharine as well.